We're going to talk about creating history for fantasy worlds, some things that I consider when I do this, and where is a good place to start. Creating history for fantasy worlds is a very, very large project, but it's also one that I feel like you kind of have to take on if you're writing a fantasy book. Now, as far as I'm concerned, you don't have to have the entire world history from the world's creation to the world's end. In fact, I actually advise you not to try to do that because it's unnecessary. I can't think of any book where you actually need everything. And part of the reason why you don't need everything is that history is very, very complicated. And what I mean by that is, first of all, many things contribute to history. You can say that this war started because of this thing, but if there wasn't a lot of conflict underneath, then that thing wouldn't have led to a war. So while, yes, you can say that this thing is what started the war, it was the spark, but there must have been something to burn for that spark to actually start the fire. And when it comes to applying this in a fantasy setting or in your book, the point is that, yes, you can say that when this person was murdered, that is what started this entire conflict, but everything can't be about that particular conflict. Everything can't be about, oh, you murdered this person. It also has to be about, oh, you stole this piece of land 100 years ago, and we know that everyone from this part of the world is evil, and we know that you can't trust them, and they always cheat. Either they cheat when you're playing games with them, or you can't trust people who come from there to trade because they're going to cheat you on the price, or they always exaggerate how amazing their things are, and they're untrustworthy. Things like that always have to be underneath. A conflict can't be just about your people murdered this person who I've never met and probably don't care about, but I'm still gonna hate you for it. Also related to this is that two sides in a conflict will never have the same idea about what started the war, what happened, or when, or who did the right thing at the right time, or who is a hero and who is a villain. So the winners of a conflict, they're going to tell their tale, and that is probably what is going to be in, history books and stuff. But the losers are also going to have their tale, and that's not going to match up. And that is a sort of detail that is important to have. If one culture says that, oh, this was a great hero of ages past, there is going to be some other group somewhere who are like, yeah, no, actually, that was the villain. He invaded our lands and murdered thousands of our people. They're possibly not going to say this out loud, but there's going to be this little, no, you're telling the wrong story. And who's to say who's right or wrong? They're probably both a little bit right and a little bit wrong. And the reason that they're going to be both right and wrong is that when time passes, people are going to forget details, and as the tale gets passed down through the generations, they're going to tell it in a slightly different way, and they're going to try to make this, the winners basically, look better than they actually were. And stories are going to change. And I mean, we can see that even in our world, things that happened just 50 years ago, when a lot of people who are alive now were alive then and remember these things, the tale is still a little bit different, and people of later generations are going to be like, no, but I have this other idea what happened. And some stories will be closer to the truth than others, but there is always going to be aspects of any event that is going to be lost with time. And that's something that I try to remember when because I have my entire big fantasy world where I write things that take place 1,000 years in the past and 1,000 years in the future and in different parts of the world. And I need to remember that even though I wrote this story, I know exactly what happened in the story. 1,000 years later, they might have forgotten that story. 100 years later, it might be vastly different from what I actually wrote. And the thing that I've already touched upon is that time is very strange. Like I said, it doesn't take long for a story to be warped. I mean, again, things that happened 50 years ago, people have different ideas about, and even something that happened 2 weeks ago, you and the friend that you did that thing with might have slightly different ideas of what actually happened and why and when and where and how. I want to take the example that 100 years. 100 years is a very, very long time. 100 years ago was when women finally had the right to vote here in Sweden, also in the US and a bunch of other places. That was around the time when women got the right to vote in a lot of places. Radio was the big mass media back 100 years ago, and Hitler had only just started his political career. So this sounds like a pretty long time ago. But at the same time, 100 years ago, my great-grandmother was 25 years old. She lived to be over 100 years old, and I remember her. Granted, I was very young when she passed away, but I still remember her. I remember visiting her, having conversations with her. A person who was alive back when TV was not a thing, when women couldn't vote. She was alive and an adult at that point. So bearing that in mind, that is something that I think about a lot when I create history for my fantasy world, that 100 years is both a very long time, a lot of things can happen, but at the same time, one single person can live through all of that and remember it, and from that point of view, it's really not that long a time. And this is something that I want to point out, that a lot of fantasy that I read, the authors don't really seem to have a grasp of how long 100 years is, or how long 1,000 years is for that matter. A lot of times, especially in fantasy, society has looked the same for 1,000 years. That is just not the case. Society changes a lot in 1,000 years, even in just 100 years. Again, think about what the world looked like 100 years ago and what it looks like now. It is so different. And even though, I mean, a lot of fantasy focuses on medieval-ish times, and you tend to think of like medieval times as just this long period of time where everything looked the same. But society did change a lot over the course of those 1,000 years that medieval times is counted as being between the year 500 and the year 1500, roughly, depending on where you are in the world. The point is, society changed a lot. Now, because history is a very broad subject, it's very big, and time is weird and strange, it is sometimes difficult to know where to start when creating the history for your fantasy world. And, I mean, basically there are two places to start. Either you start from the present or from the past. I mean, I suppose you could also do the future, but I've never done that. I don't know really how that would work, so, yeah. I'm gonna focus on the present and the past. And I think I usually start from the present, because I know that this is the story I want to tell and this is the society I want to tell it in. What kind of stories do they tell? Why do they have a very bad relationship with their neighboring country? Or why is there so much prejudice between these two categories of people and that kind of thing? So I start from the present. I know that, okay, these two groups of people don't get along. Why do they not get along? There was probably a war at some point. What is it they don't get along about? Is it that they don't trust each other? There's probably some sort of history there with betrayal from both sides. So what kind of stories are they telling and what kind of stories are they telling? And I always try to figure out, okay, where do they actually converge? What is the truth? What actually happened? I do that because I think that's fascinating, but you don't really actually have to know the truth unless you're gonna write that story at some point. You just need to know what kind of things do they tell and what kind of things do they tell and what happened and when did these things happen to get the result that you are at here today in this place where you're writing. Also bear in mind, I am talking a lot about conflicts and wars and things like that, and that is not the only thing that you should focus on in your history, because there's a lot of other things going on as well in the world. Apart from wars, there are natural disasters, there are plagues and things like that, and those things are also very important. So that's something that I personally want to see more about. I want to see more history about, oh, the Great Plague or the Great Flood or things like that, and not just, yeah, there's been lots of wars, because I'm kind of sick of wars. Despite that being the first thing that I started talking about when it comes to history, I think that should prove how much wars is a thing of fantasy history when it doesn't have to be. That doesn't have to be the only thing that we talk about. So that was starting from the present. Starting from the past, I usually do if I'm not really sure what I'm going to write about in the present, or if history isn't really all that important to what I'm writing, because I still know that history needs to exist. There needs to be something that people think about, and like, basically, I mean, history forms society as it looks right now, and if I don't know what society looks like right now, I just know that, oh, I have this character and I have this story, then I try to make up some history and I start from the past. And I make up a few wars, a few plagues, a few natural disasters happening both where I am setting the story, but also in other places around it or far away. Now bear in mind, I said that before, that if something happened a long, long time ago, it's gonna be, people aren't gonna remember it correctly. It's going to be not exactly what happened, just something that sort of has something to do with what happened. And the same thing is true of something that happened a long way away, not just a long time ago. And I mean, the further away something happened in a time when you can't use the internet to tell people exactly what's happening right now, when it took a few months to get news from a different part of the world, something that happened not all that long ago, but far away, is more tainted, more skewed than something that happened at the same time, but closer. So basically, I do that. I come up with, okay, there was a big earthquake in the neighboring country 100 years ago. What might that mean for here and now? That place was probably, say it was completely ruined and a lot of people came to this place. How did they react? Why did they react that way? Did they help, or did they say that, no, that's your problem, not ours? Or what did they do and why? And what does that mean for the people that live in this society now? Are they very mixed of people who originally came from here and people whose ancestors left the other country that was ruined by the earthquake? Or what does it look like? And I find things like that very fascinating, so I maybe spend a little bit too much time on that, but I hope that that also makes the society that I write about a little bit more interesting, adds a little depth to it. So as usual, these videos are very theoretical, so if you want the practical applications, how exactly I do this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, because I am going to make a workshop video about this and create some history, so you don't want to miss that. Now, remember what I said about history being complicated? Because that is actually a good thing. That means that you don't have to figure out exactly what happened. You can just figure out a few different stories that people tell, and whatever actually happened, especially if it was a long time ago, but even if it was just 100 years ago, doesn't really matter. This is a place where being inconsistent is not really that big of a problem, because you should be inconsistent, because history is inconsistent. People tell stories in a different way. People make the different people the villain, or tell different stories of how they were perceived in the past. And that's a good thing. That is how it actually works. As long as you make sure that, you know, two friends who grew up in the same place and heard the same stories from the same people don't tell different stories, unless you have a reason for them to do that. So that's the good news. History is complicated, but that doesn't have to scare you. And that's what I want you to take away from this video. Don't be scared. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.